Good afternoon and welcome. I'm delighted to be part of an event that recognizes the achievements and contributions of Albert Murray. As one of the most perceptive interpreters of American art and culture, Murray celebrates the life-affirming elements in the African American experience and the cultural richness of Black America and of America as a whole. And he's still, in the words of Henry Louis Gates, king of cats. Our presenters for this session are Lauren Walsh and Maurice Pogue. Lauren Walsh is a doctoral student in English and Comparative Literature at Columbia University, where she earned her MA and BA degrees. She has studied in Germany and France and has published a critical essay on Thomas Hardy's The Return of the Native. She was also a recipient of the Jacob K. Javits Fellowship. Her dissertation, Snapshots of the Past, Photography's Influence on Literary Memory, examines the ways in which fictional representations of memory have been informed by the development of photography. She is interested more generally in the role of memory and history in 20th century literature. The title of today's presentation is Murray and Mann, Variations on a Theme. Maurice Pogue is a Tuskegee University alumnus and is currently a graduate student at Michigan State University. His interests include the dynamics and function of race and racialism in America, as well as Black male subjectivity, the formation, location, and performance of Black identity from, but not limited to, a heteronormative mode. He was an intern at the Institute for Recruitment of Teachers, Andover, and he published his first essay, Sutpen the Half-Human, in the 2006 Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Journal during his MMUF Fellowship. He is currently at work on a critical history of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. Today he will discuss Murray's Mulatto America. We'll begin with Ms. Walsh.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to preface by saying that I've known Mr. Murray personally for years and have had the great fortune of talking to him about literature and philosophy on a number of occasions, so it's my pleasure to be here today. Albert Murray has often cited his literary influences, for example, Faulkner, Malraux, Eliot, and of course Hemingway, of whom he has said he was the master of epic-making style. But it is Thomas Mann, whom Murray has repeatedly referenced, if not always elaborated on, who holds a special role in the development of this singular American writer. Indeed, says Murray, Mann is my #1 20th century author. Murray read Mann for the first time in the late 1930s, and he recognized in the German author's novels some themes that he would later elaborate on, bringing them to the fore in his own essays and fiction. Through Murray's pen, the portrayal of these themes takes on resonance for American literature and the era of blues and jazz. From the Omni-Americans to the Hero in the Blues to Train Whistle Guitar and beyond, Murray's writings work together as variations on Mannian themes of, first, the concept of a universal aesthetic statement, second, the function of myth in the portrayal of human endeavor, and finally, the depiction and purpose of the epic hero. It was Thomas Mann's multi-volume novel, Joseph and His Brothers, that was integral to Murray's elaboration and refinement of these themes. Joseph and His Brothers is a novel that took 16 years to write. Published over 4 volumes, the novel was not only periodically put on hold while Mann worked on other publications, but was written at a time of great historical adversity. While Mann was writing, the Weimar Republic crumbled, National Socialism took hold, and ultimately World War II devastated the European continent. All the while, Mann continued his project, which is a political and social commentary of his times, set in the framework of the biblical narrative, the Old Testament stories of Jacob and Esau, and of Jacob's son Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, but who prevailed and eventually became a beneficent and socially proactive Egyptian leader. Mann, as we can see, was not writing about the blues, and yet Murray recognized the ways in which Mann's protagonist Joseph was a blues hero, and he saw connections to Mann's philosophic approach to universality and mythic narratives. The blues hero, Murray has noted, doesn't deny the limitations of his setting, but acknowledges them in order to rise above them. Joseph is a riff-style improviser, and importantly, a literary antecedent to Murray's celebrated character, Scooter. Like Joseph, throughout the installments of Joseph and His Brothers, Scooter recurs through Murray's fiction, first appearing in Train Whistle Guitar in 1974. Yet Mann's influence on Murray's artistry had an effect earlier on, and in order to see a culmination in Scooter, one must first understand the role of universality and the place of the mythic in Murray's nonfiction writings and in his general philosophy of storytelling. In order to be an effective storyteller, Murray explains, the writer must invoke the universal through the language of the local. In other words, he must speak in the vernacular of his character's setting, but the implications should be broad enough to reach and hold meaning to a far more universal readership. That is the only objective for an ambitious writer, to take those idiomatic particulars and make something universal out of it that is true for mankind at large, says Murray. To this end, Murray invokes what I think of as the once upon a time test, which appears in The Hero and the Blues and elsewhere. He offers the brilliant insight that, contrary to one's initial assumption, the phrase once upon a time, which begins so many fairy tales, legends, and myths, doesn't at all refer to one place or one time. Rather, it gestures towards the idea that, as Murray puts it, time after time and place after place, such and such came to pass. Human existence is thus and so. Such stories present lessons. This is good, that is bad, do this, avoid that. Thus, the once upon a time tale, or in fact the genre of myth more generally, presents a framework for seeing, evaluating, and learning from and about the human condition. And sure enough, one locates this idea of the once upon a time in Mann's Joseph and His Brothers. What concerns us here is not calculable time, Mann writes, which is to say that his focus is not on any one specific historical moment, but on the universals that mythic narratives carry throughout time. Mann continues, quote, "The phrase once upon a time embodies a double sense of past and future, and therewith its burden of potential present." Interestingly, both writers have commented on the philosophic significance of the once upon a time expression, and both use it throughout their works. In The Omni-Americans, Murray connects the once upon a time phrase to the role of mythic narratives. In fact, he acknowledges and privileges a Mannian influence on these ideas, opening that text with a discussion of Joseph and his brothers. He explores Mann's idea that, quote, "the whole of history itself is largely mythological." Myths, legends, folktales, and in Mann's case, the stories of religion, are narratives to teach us about ourselves and about human nature. The mythologies are the framing devices for imparting an essential knowledge about who we are. Mann uses scripture, the wisdom of the ages, to get at truths, at contemporary wisdom of humanity, Murray told me one time. Mann isn't so much working through the biblical story on any religious level, but working out what it shows us about people and how they respond to their conditions. Be it ancient Egypt or 1930s Germany, underlying truths exist for any time and place. And as Murray recognized, the lessons of Mann are transportable to American history too. He has said, Mann can sneak contemporary knowledge into any setting. He goes back to a fable, to religion, to find meaning in the contemporary, to investigate the complexity of human behavior. He explores the universal nature of man in the realm of myths and legend, which provide insight into archetypal human nature. The once upon a time idiom, then, is a signifier of universality. In addition, Thomas Mann's ability to integrate information, historical, religious, mathematical, or political, also hugely impressed a young Albert Murray. Mann synthesized knowledge, synthesized it in a way that made it wisdom, and that was eye-opening for Murray. He told me one time that everything he learned in school, the science, the psychology, Freud, relativity, everything, Murray said, it all made sense after Mann. They aren't just pieces of knowledge, they tie together and the implications matter. It's all necessary, Murray asserted, in order to try to understand the complexity of human endeavor. And this, he said with grave appreciation, is the scope that literature can have. Murray began to think about the role, even the goal, of the writer and of the impact he can have after reading Mann. Murray asks, what does it mean to have access to vast historical, scientific, social, and anthropological understanding, and how should the informed and concerned artist use that knowledge toward greater ends? In answer, he says that first, writers must be knowledgeable in contemporary developments and debates, and by extension passionately interested in those disciplines of innovation. And second, they must synthesize that knowledge and present it eloquently to their readers. The ramifications, Murray tells us in The Omni-Americans, are immense. He writes, perhaps every serious writer proceeds on the assumption that a sufficiently vernacular and revolutionary image can be created to initiate a millennium during his generation. These ideas are echoed in Murray's train whistle guitar when the mentor figure Luzanna Chali tells the young protagonist and his friend, and this is a quote that Professor McGuire also just gave us, the young generation was supposed to take what they were already born with and learn how to put it with everything the civil engineers and inventors and doctors and lawyers and bookkeepers had found out about the world, and be the ones to bring about the day the old folks had always been prophesying and praying for. Indeed, Train Whistle Guitar, as we will see, attempts both to capture a time and a place and also to speak more broadly to a universal readership through and about the complexities of modern life. Like Murray's nonfiction writings, The Omni-Americans and The Hero and the Blues, as I've mentioned briefly, this novel embodies the imprint of Mann's ideas on universality, the mythic narrative, and the epic hero. Train Whistle Guitar charts the growth of Scooter, a young African-American boy in a small southern town in the 1920s. Train Whistle brings its readers into that time and place, introducing us to the people Scooter knows and the social, political, and racial experiences that he and those around him live. At the same time, it brings us out of that time and place because the lessons that Scooter learns, we realize upon reflection, are lessons that apply broadly, principles such as conviction and respect, the function of history, the value of family. Stanley Crouch writes, "In ways that bring together the archetype and the plausible character, Murray invents figures who represent certain backgrounds and are composites of Negro American history in the flesh. Ex-slaves, folk blues players and sophisticated jazzmen, World War I veterans, school teachers, and so on. This allows the boy to look history in the face and listen to what it has to say through the people who know what they know." The lesson is that there is a timelessness to life's experiences. History functions as a mirror onto the present, or as Mann put it, the past carries a presentness. Early on in the novel, Scooter alludes to a basic, if not yet fleshed out understanding of this when he says, "Because I knew, even while something was happening, that it wasn't just happening then. I didn't know very much about historical cause and effect then, but I knew enough to realize that when something happened, it was part of something that had been going on before." And there we have one half of the once upon a time. Scooter, though unaware of just how significant his statement is, implicitly tells us that history looks more like time after time than like an isolated moment in time. So what of the place after place that Murray explained as the other half of the meaning behind Once Upon a Time? Train Whistle Guitar tells the careful reader that although the story's setting is textually Gasoline Point, Alabama, it's metaphorically any place USA. That is, Murray revises the idea of rootedness in his efforts to create representative anecdotes and definitive episodes that add up to a comprehensive and universally appealing American epic, as Murray puts it. Gasoline Point implies a place of origin from which one metaphorically fills up the gas tank and then can go anywhere. Such is the significance of lines like, "You couldn't see the L&N bridge from the skiff boat landing where we were standing then, but we knew where it was because it was also the gateway through which the Chickasaw Bog, which was really a tributary, flowed out into the Mobile River, which led down into the Mobile Bay, which spread out into the Gulf of Mexico, which was part of the old Spanish Main, which was the beginning of the Seven Seas." The local, or shown explicitly, connects outward to the universal. While there is a stress on one's point of origin, there is as much an emphasis on outward extension and encompassing experience. Even the twofold interpretation of Mobile, pronounced of course Mobile, but spelled mobile, only fuels this sense of expansion. The Mobile River and Bay may be fixed points on a map, but ironically, their very place names convey an embodied mobility. And lest we miss those references to time after time and place after place, the phrase "once upon a time" itself makes appearances in Train Whistle Guitar, most significantly in the beginning where Murray ties it right into one of the mythic narratives that he employs in this novel. Where Mann used religious account as the mythic framework for his text, Murray gives us, for example, the American folktale of Brer Rabbit, just one of the many narrative tools that will underscore the role of the universal throughout Train Whistle Guitar. And while Brer Rabbit speaks to an insider status, stories of subversion from the inside out, Murray will show us that through an internal or vernacular language one can nevertheless get at the universal. Like the movement across mapped terrain, the myth-like tale of Brer Rabbit originates with a specific culture and in a particular time and place, but widens to a greater audience through Murray's appropriation and use of it. The mythic, we'll recall, is a story of tradition that offers insight into the human condition. It therefore allows the storyteller to talk beyond the scope of the specific, instead taking up essential issues of human activity and endeavor. In speaking about Gasoline Point at the start of the novel, the narrator imparts, "Once upon a time, it was also the briar patch, which is why my name was Scooter and is also why the chinaberry tree that was ever as tall as any fairy tale beanstalk was, among other things, my spyglass tree." Invoking the once upon a time and the Brer Rabbit story, as well as the fairy tale of Jack and the Beanstalk, Murray establishes from the outset that Scooter's story of an African-American boy growing up in the South will embody a fabled element. In Murray's version, however, the sense of fabled as make-believe is undone by the reality of Scooter's surroundings, which include brawls and murder, characters gone insane, and a stunning realization about his parentage. Instead, Train Whistle Guitar makes myth of Scooter's real-world experiences through the very language of the myth of Brer Rabbit, and thus it both acknowledges Scooter's trials as experiences faced by others, and also renders Scooter's life and encounters accessible to others. One of the ways that the Brer Rabbit references achieve the universal is through the use of a trickster hero, an archetypal character of many cultural, religious, and historic traditions. That Scooter is overtly linked to Brer Rabbit on numerous occasions signals his status as such a hero. Scooter, like the rabbit, embodies a wit and agility. And while Brer Rabbit stands as one iteration of the archetypal trickster, in Thomas Mann's Joseph we find another. In fact, Murray would have known of Brer Rabbit long before reading Mann, but encountering an adapted version of the trickster in Joseph likely confirmed for him the universality of the trickster figure. Ultimately, it is the trickster Joseph whose trajectory more similarly parallels Scooter. And so while Murray was familiar with the Brer Rabbit lore from an early age, it was through the lens of Mann that the import of the Brer Rabbit myth as a universalizing device could be more fully realized. Where Brer Rabbit functions as an example of Murray's utilization of a vernacular mythic tradition, it is back to Joseph that one can look to find a basis for Murray's figure of the hero. For Murray, a trickster is playful, devilish, rascally, and notably resilient. He may get into trouble, but he also learns from or remedies his mistakes. A trickster might, for example, skip out on school to spend a day as an explorer with little Buddy Marshall. He could also, knowing full well what the adults would say, lose his virginity under the kitchen table to Deljean McCrae. And he may just as well pretend to lie sleeping while actually eavesdropping in order to learn that his birth mother is not the woman who raised him. Scooter, like the literary tricksters who precede him, is nimble and quick. He leans upon his trickster stick. He is, according to the character Deljean McCrae, a mannish rascal, or perhaps in literary homage one could read that as a Mann-ish rascal. Murray's protagonist rarely employs flat-out trickery. Instead, he navigates tricky situations, and in so doing he, rather like the blues hero, prevails. And thus Scooter is a mixture of trickster hero and blues hero, the combination or culmination of which might be thought of as Murray's epic hero. Again, this idea will trace back to a Mannian influence. In Joseph, we see a trickster character who, in his youth, is immature and self-concerned, even wily and self-serving. Murray puts it a little more bluntly. Joseph is a cocky, conceited SOB. Mann crafts his Joseph with a tongue of wit and a face of beauty, and the cunning hero makes use of those looks when it works to his advantage. He also takes advantage of the people around him when that benefits his position. He is charming but also manipulative, and while Joseph's roguish traits are oftentimes just immature, they are also sometimes downright cruel. Mann, however, sets up a character who will grow beyond these flaws. Murray's protagonist, who shares Joseph's rascally and devilish attributes, is never as condemnable as Joseph is at times. Murray plays with the idea of the hero, inventing his own variant of the archetype. Moreover, Murray notes that the trickster element is not just in the Joseph character himself, but also in the way Mann writes his character. "Mann, he's singing it to you, he's playing with you," Murray told me one day in an effervescent voice that dramatized the very significance of his words. The mischievous tone and playful technique of Mann's writing let those pages resonate their stories. For Murray, Mann is a poet, a singer, and a composer. And why exactly does Murray find this style so effective? Because, he told me, it's fun, it's playful, it gets the reader hooked, and that's how the writer imparts a lesson. The lessons Joseph learns and in turn delivers to his readers are essentially lessons of selflessness and of service for the good of others. It is Joseph, the seer and provider, with his fabulous fusion of poetic imagination and political skill, who is best equipped of all Mann's protagonists to confront and come to realistic terms with the problems of contemporary existence, writes Murray in The Hero in the Blues. What Murray identifies in Joseph is rather like what Luzana Chali asks of Scooter when he tells the boy to stay in school and to use his education in order to better the conditions of society. Furthermore, Murray sees in Joseph's development a link to the blues tradition, noting that, quote, Joseph goes beyond his failures in the very blues-singing process of acknowledging them and admitting to himself how bad conditions are. That is, Murray sees Joseph not only as a trickster figure, but also as a blues hero, as that character capable of both conceding the blues and also stomping them away. And I've described already how this applies to Scooter. A discussion of the blues, of course, is a discussion of yet another mythic tradition, and indeed the blues infuses train whistle guitar as much as the popular folk tradition of Brer Rabbit. In so doing, it adds to the essence of universality that Murray strives for in his writing. In a scene early on in Joseph and His Brothers, Mann portrays Joseph standing by a well, whispering, quote, murmured sing-song of legends and ancestors. Mann then goes on to describe, quote, an improvisation where all sorts of remote allusions and associations mingle as Joseph sings a variant and extension, end quote, on the original riff. Murray's writing, of course, better captures the swing, the movement of a bluesy or jazz-style literature, and I rather prefer his language of extension, elaboration, and refinement to Mann's variant and extension. Nevertheless, one can see how Mann's ideas and words held special resonance for Murray. The import of improvisation to a jazz writer is clear, but those allusions and associations hold meaning as well, especially if one thinks of the technique of signifying adopted by some blues musicians, which creates a framework of shared discourse through references and insinuations of a specific vernacular. I can't say it any better than Murray, who has referred to, quote, a little chicken butt signifying that is an indispensable part of Southern ritual. It can certainly be said that Murray playfully extended, elaborated, and refined what he originally found in Mann. Joseph ultimately is the quick and nimble character who frees himself from his enslavement and returns, wiser, more humble, more honorable, to become a leader and provider. In many ways, he is Scooter's literary ancestor. Scooter returns home at the end of Train, Whistle, Guitar after having been away at college, and he too at this stage takes on the aura of a more experienced, more purposeful persona. Of course, we know that one of the lessons emphasized to Scooter throughout the novel is the importance of education. Even during Scooter's period of youthful transgression, Murray alludes to the character a mature and educated Scooter will be. We read, I was to become a schoolboy above and beyond everything else, for all the absolutely indispensable times I was still to play hooky with little Buddy Marshall. But education doesn't just come in the form of books and exams. Scooter realizes that his possibilities of survival, not to mention achievement, are predicated on his perpetual nimbleness, says Murray. This, in fact, is what the protagonist has been learning all along, whether or not he realized it. Through the stories of elders, through personal mentors, as well as figures of legend, and especially through mythic traditions, Scooter learns life lessons, and in discovering those fundamental lessons, he also learns ways to navigate his personal time and place, the racially segregated South. And yet, writes Crouch, Murray became the first Negro writer since Ellison to so unflinchingly embrace an American identity that transcended race. Scooter may be fixed in a narrative time and space, but the novel itself and its lessons are not. Train, Whistle, Guitar depicts the challenging circumstances that breed confidence, ambition, and transcendent resistance. The whole idea, explains Murray, is resilience. You gotta have the resilience, the elegance in your movement, the hipness in your outlook that will get you through the briar patch. And how better to achieve that than through a universalized blues hero, an epic hero whose connection to a mythic narrative gives a broader scope to the interpretation of his setting's idiomatic particulars. The role that Mann played in shaping Murray's development was surely significant, and there are yet many other paths of Mannian influence that I've not had a chance to discuss. I'll just close by saying that in Mann, Murray respected a writer who put his learning toward literature of a social good. And through Mann, Murray began to formulate his own variations on the ideas of heroes, myths, and the universals of personal and social experience. And it is wise to remember what Murray tells us. Ultimately, he says, my stories are really about what it means to be human. Thank you.